The actual weight or amount of spring that you have in the quiver tip you use should be dictated by the style of fishing. Generally for this open-ended feeder style fishing, then a quiver tip somewhere between 1.5 and 3 ounces is about right. The most popular choices being 2 to 2.5 ounce quiver tips. Now with this particular rod, the Grunt, you actually get a choice of 3 tips, all of varying stiffnesses. This is the middle one of the 3 tips. I've got a slight bend in that tip so that if the carp runs away from me, it's got enough latitude left in the tip, and I'll show you now, to bend the tip like this. So if the tip pulls round that way, as it just has, and I make a strike, it was quite a nice illustration of the principle there. Couldn't have timed it better really. So what I'm doing is keeping the rod up and just drawing it back slowly and winding up the slack. There's no sudden movements here. What you mustn't do is to try winding in when the fish is running away from you and the reel's turning, when the drag's giving line, because you won't achieve anything, and all you'll succeed in doing is putting twist in your line, and that's no good. So allow the fish to make a run when it wants to, and when you can, recover line. I'm trying to keep the rod at a fairly elevated angle. Keep a bend in the rod. Don't try and horse the fish. Just keep on steady pressure and allow the drag to kick in when it needs to. Now I've got to be a little bit careful of bringing this fish in too close too quickly, because the wooden jetty under my feet is an obvious refuge for a fish to bolt into if it decides it doesn't want to come to the net. And you'll notice now it's going on another run. I'm quite happy about that. I know I'm not going to get this fish in ridiculously quickly, and I'd rather tire it out a little bit before I get it too close to the edge, because I think it will break me off under the stages if I let it get there. The fish is coming now, nice steady pressure. Feels like a good carp actually. Well, I wasn't expecting such an instant result as this, but what I can tell you is that the ground bait mix I've shown you, the marine pellet mix, is just absolutely deadly. Fish can smell it from a long way away and it really draws them in. It's a nice fine mix that explodes out the feeder well, puts plenty of smell in the water, and of course it complements pellets and boilies really well actually. Now in the feeder I'm putting in a mixture of pellets and 10mm boilies. I can alternate between a pellet on the hook and a boilie on the hook. Now's the critical part as we get the fish in close, and I'm sure it will make an attempt to dive under the jetty, so I'm just going to stand up to give myself a little bit more leverage in case it does that. This one's really going. Now I'm using side strain to stop the fish from reaching those platforms, and that's worked. He's just moving out now. It's not finished yet though. You can see the importance of a correctly set drag with big fish like this, and also using a rod that can give the fish a bit of stick when you need to, when it runs close to snags. Typical Drayton Reservoir fish, they grow to over 30 pounds here, and you've got to give them some stick when it's needed. This one's coming right underneath me and he's trying to get under the platforms. But you'll notice that even though I'm getting a fair old fight with this fish, I'm trying not to make any sudden movements, because it's sudden movements that cost you fish. Now I'm going to just ease the drag up a little bit because the fish is running hard for the legs of the platform. It's not a bad one at all. Well, that's avoided that little burst of danger. And he's away again. Now you'll understand why I'm using such heavy gear. Our fish is going under the platforms again. Crikey. Gotcha. Well, that's a fairly quick turnaround. Obviously there's a lot of fish in this reservoir, but it just goes to show the pulling power of the ground bait feeder and the feeder mix. This is a fairly typical fish for this reservoir, and it's typical of the fish that people nowadays are catching on the feeder. Let's have a look at him. You'll notice I'm holding him over the net just in case the fish wriggles. It's a good double figure fish, probably about between 12 and 14 pounds. And that's why we need heavy feeder kit these days, because fish like this take some stopping, I'll tell you. Lovely looking carp, real breeze block this one, and that's why I held the net where it is, so the fish flips, you can just place him back in, and when you want to return the fish, just put him in the net, lower him down into the water, wait until you can see that the fish is swimming upright and he can hold his position, he looks ready to go away. This one hasn't been out of the water long, so I'm sure he's going to be fine, and then just lower the front of the net and let him swim away. Well, that's a brilliant start. I was trying to demonstrate to you how the quiver tip system works and how you spot bites, so I think what we'll do is we'll have another go at that. I've managed to keep a bait out there for more than a minute, which is good, and we've got a gentle curve in the quiver tip. We've already seen what happens if a fish moves away from our position with the bait. It will literally pull the tip round, and that's an obvious bite. What's not so obvious is sometimes the fish runs towards you, and when it does that, it actually causes the line to go slack like this. Now, if you've got the tip lying already straight with slack line between the tip and the feeder, you're not going to see those slack line bites. So you must maintain a small curve in the tip so that if the fish does run towards you, the tip will drop backwards and straighten. And that is equally as important in terms of its strikeability sometimes as one that pulls the rod tip right round. So we've got two types of bites to consider, the pull round and the drop back, and we need to set the tip accordingly. Now, just to confuse things a little bit more, particularly when we're fishing for carp and bream, which are two regular species targeted on the feeder, we've also got the problem of dealing with these things called line bites. Now, these are caused by the fish swimming into the line, bumping into the line with their bodies in their eagerness to get at the feeder. Sometimes the fish will actually push the feeder to try and get at its contents, and you'll see that the tip will start to nudge and sway and knock. And part of the art of feeder fishing is working out the difference between a false or line bite and the real thing. And hopefully later on we'll get the opportunity to see some line bites taking place and maybe give you a few ideas about how to tell the difference.